Hey everyone, I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast, also from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, with a bonus episode here from the Locked On Steelers podcast. And I want to just talk about a discussion that we kind of had during the week as far as something that I talked about on Twitter. Didn't talk as much about during the show because with the hustle and bustle of the show, sometimes we can't get to stuff. And that's revolving around PFF grades and kind of the back and forth that happened on what grade should be what and how TJ Watt versus Myles Garrett. A lot of conversations there. So if you're interested in that, hang in there because this is going to be a discussion about that where I go over some numbers and kind of break down what I think fans should really know when we're talking about PFF grades, how to analyze players, et cetera, et cetera. So again, this is back to the Steelers-Browns Monday Night Football game. The Steelers win 26-22, largely because their outside linebackers, their edge rushers, TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith dominated the game. Both scored touchdowns. Alex Highsmith on a pick six, he also forced a fumble that resulted in TJ Watt's touchdown. Both got a sack. Both Alex Highsmith had 7 tackles. TJ Watt had 4 tackles. Both had 6 or more pressures. And TJ Watt also batted down a pass. And so they were dominant. They were the main reason the Steelers won the game, even with their other parts of the defense struggling at times. And that was a huge part of the game. And at the same token, on the other side of on the other team, you had Myles Garrett, who had a good game, just not as great. He had 1 tackle, I think 3 quarterback pressures, solid, but not as dominant as those guys. So after the game, you're thinking probably like I was thinking, like, okay, well, those 2 guys were clearly the best players on the field. But according to PFF, that wasn't the case. And PFF, of course, is Pro Football Focus, a database that goes on and analyzes football and gives people grades about how they performed. And when you looked at their grades, you had the Steelers' grades, Alex Highsmith the 91.1 and TJ Watt an 82.6, and then Myles Garrett was a 91.7, making him the highest graded player in the game. Now, again, I want to say this before we get more into this. I like PFF as a service, like the hard data that they provide, coverages, like, how many times a person was targeted and how many times they allowed receptions, things like that, things that are hard stats that are easily determinable to a person, not as subjective. Those things are very good that PFF serves, but the grades often it brings in and implies a lot of subjectivity, and I'll explain why in a minute here. And to me, the grades are probably the worst part of PFF as far as the things that they don't provide that are I feel accurate or objective oftentimes when we look at things, or at least skewed in a direction that I think takes away from the game of football. So I basically tweeted that after the game. Kevin Dotson, former Steeler, addressed it. He said these PFF grades are ridiculous, and I agreed. Myles Garrett getting 1 tackle in this game, and Alex Highsmith, who did all these things, having a lower grade, and even if it's marginally lower, like, yeah, sure, it was just 0.6 lower, but like that'd be like someone getting a 95 on their test and another person getting an 80, and you give the person who got an 80 a 96 and saying, oh, it's not that bad, you should be fine with that. That was terrible, as well as TJ Watt, who received a significantly lower grade. So that was my whole point about this. And a PFF employee, PFF Sam, came in and, made a comment despite making only 1 tackle, quoting me with a laughing emoji, thinking that this was, a funnier thing to do there. And like, listen, I get it. His insinuation was saying, all I was saying was that, Myles Garrett only made 1 tackle. There's nothing else that he did that was of value to the game. That's not what I was saying, though. And I kind of, made that clear in my counterpoint, to him. I was like, you're issuing the laughing emoji because you're not actually engaging me in any debate here, because you're wrong. Because even though you're saying here, oh yeah, he had these other pressures here and he did these other things in his pass rush win rate, I agree that he did all those things, but none of those trump the guys who actually made the plays that actually won the game and were the biggest moments of the game. And that's, again, where I kind of think things get a little bit crazy when we start a back and forth there. And I think some things get lost in Twitter and online debates. And that's kind of why I wanted to do this show, to talk about this a little bit further so that you, the fans, can have a more reasonable discussion and at least hear out full arguments as far as what each side is saying here, so that you can understand what the back and forth actually was. So on PFF Sam's side and PFF side, they're saying that basically the argument is that Myles Garrett was declared by Pro Football Focus to have won 40% of his pass rush reps, and that's where the stat pass rush win percentage comes from. And you're going to hear that a lot during this show. And all that means is, let's say that he rushed the quarterback 10 times, 40% of for those times, he beat his man. He didn't necessarily pressure the quarterback, didn't touch the quarterback, didn't sack the quarterback, but he beat his man in front of him, and someone determined that he won that pass rush rep that works for PFF. So that says that. And to be fair, a 40% pass rush win rate is insane. Like that is like a whoa, and that is very impressive. And even if that is the case, that's awesome. But what truly should be measured in a game as far as grades and how a player actually grades out in a game isn't necessarily plays that, things that they did that might have been cool to win a certain matchup temporarily that didn't impact the play. It should be the actual plays themselves and the things that were more impactful, like the 2 touchdowns scored by the Steelers edge rushers, like the turnovers that they were part of, like the sacks that they actually did get to the quarterback on, and the more pressures that they generated throughout the game. And look, I do a lot of my homework. I work for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I work for the Locked On Podcast Network. I work for our local NBC station, WPXI. I do a lot of homework, and PFF is even included in my homework. So I know what I'm talking about here. I study the pass rush win rates, and there's sometimes that I'll admit when I'm out of my element and I'm like, hey, punters, what makes a punter good? I have no idea. Like when Presley Harvin misses a punt, don't ask me why. That's just not my thing. But on this subject, I do know what I'm talking about, and I'll explain why I think pass rush win rate, it's something to observe and something to account for, but it shouldn't be the gospel. It shouldn't be the meat of the conversation when we're talking about pass rushers. It should be finishing the job and actually winning the play. That is what actually matters. So again, I know what pass rush win rates are, and that's kind of what PFF Sam was alluding to with his comment that, oh, this guy doesn't know about pass rush win rates. But I also know that pass rush win rates are very subjective. So again, Pro Football Focus, and what I mean by subjective, I mean that they can be all over the place in how these are actually graded. So let's show you what I'm saying here. So PFF for that game said that Myles Garrett won 40% of his pass rush reps in this game. Cool. That's awesome, and that's a great number. But if you went to ESPN says he won 26% of his pass rushes. And that is a huge discrepancy. We're talking about 14% difference in how how many pass rushes were won by Myles Garrett in this game. And again, 26% is still dominant. It's great. That's awesome and everything. But it's still not more impactful than the plays that were made by the Steelers edge rushers. And again, it's a show of how different these grades can be, simply because there's no hard stat of pass rush win rate. There's no one in the press box. Like when I'm in the press box and I'm watching a game, you guys are watching it at home and looking at it on TV, or you're at the game itself. When I'm in the press box, there are people that work for the NFL that are shouting, they're collaborating with each other. That was a sack. This guy got this guy. This guy got that. And they're confirming, and they're determinable things that you can look at on film and say, this guy, TJ Watt, sacked Deshaun Watson on this play. Kenny Pickett threw an interception to Grant Delpit. Those types of things. So those are what hard stats are. But when you're looking at things like this, ESPN has a whole different person who makes a judgment call. Oh, I think Myles Garrett won the pass rush rep here, and the same thing goes for PFF. So again, you're seeing these huge discrepancies between Myles Garrett's grade from or pass rush win rate from PFF and from ESPN. But again, let's look at these ESPN rates for another discrepancy that goes in a completely different direction. Jadeveon Clowney, who I also have highlighted here, he's a former teammate of Myles Garrett, plays for the Baltimore Ravens. He has a pass rush win rate in his last game of 26%. You want to see what PFF graded him as far as his pass rush win rate for that same game? It was 6.7%. So you're basically talking about a 20% difference in the other direction from that. So it's not necessarily that ESPN just is harsher in what they grade as a pass rush win. These are just things that are going to be different based on the evaluator every single time. So again, this is where I come back to it and I say, how valuable is that versus the people who actually get the sacks, who actually pressure the quarterback or tip a pass or do something that is determinable, like, hey, this was noticed that this happened and this was tallied because this is a hard stat there. And again, that's where I think it gets lost in this conversation about analytics, about who won what and who did this and everything like that. I think that sometimes we lose if we focus too much on those numbers and analytics, we lose the impact of a game. And again, observe the analytics, take them into account, but don't make them the gospel the way that PFF's grades obviously did by putting a guy who didn't have the hard stats to back it up, compared to two other guys who dominated the game, did have the hard stats to back it up, and their team won because of how they produced those. So that's the big thing. I think the importance is to focus on the players who are actually making plays, and I want to talk more about how this is a bigger conversation for analytics, journalism, and how fans should enjoy the game and enjoy the coverage of the game, because that's what I try to do as a journalist and a podcast host and a content producer. I'm here to help educate and entertain and bring things to light and have discussions like these with you all. So I'm going to get to that point in a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, got to pay some bills. Got to talk to you guys about our sponsors at GameTime.co, because this episode is brought to you by GameTime.co. Game Time is the #1 place to go get tickets right now. Buy tickets for all your favorite events, whether it's sports, music, comedy, theater events near you, and they give you killer deals even on last-minute tickets with the best price guarantee that can't be beat. Download the Game Time app today, and when you do, you can even book tickets up to the last minute of the event. If you see it at the last second and you're like, "Oh, I'm free, I got off work," you can still get tickets for great prices with exclusive flash deals on all sorts of events at Game Time. And again, download the Game Time app or go to the website GameTime.co, and then you can see their best price guarantee, which means that you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets to the same event in the same section and row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to the website GameTime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're also brought to you by Prize Picks, the most fun way that you can play daily fantasy sports and win up to 25 times your money at the same time. With Prize Picks, all you have to do is pick 2 to 6 players and guess more or less on their projected stats, and you can win money right away. Prize Picks is the new fun daily fantasy game that everyone needs to start playing right now. If you're big into fantasy sports, this is a way to get your daily fix by selecting individual player projections and making simple decisions whether they're going to get more or less than the projection given to you by Prize Picks. So to understand this means you're not playing against thousands of people trying to get the best lineup to win money. All you're saying is, hey, do I think TJ Watt's going to get more than 1.5 sacks this game? Do I think George Pickens will score more than half a touchdown in this game? Say more or less, and you can win money from Prize Picks. So go to prizepicks.com right now to check things out, or download the Prize Picks app today. They also have weekly promotions like Taco Tuesday, where Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25%, so you can even get even more value when you play Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com today to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. I want to continue this discussion here. And now that we've kind of gotten the point out of the way of specifically Monday Night Football and why TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith were the more impactful players in this game and should have received higher grades from PFF, we can move from that to, I think, a bigger discussion as far as how analytics plays into what we enjoy as far as football coverage and what we consume to understand what we're watching and what's happening and what could happen in the future. So, one, it is beneficial to the study of football to be able to see how a player performed even on plays they didn't ultimately impact. Like, for example, Myles Garrett, what the pass rush win rate is saying is like, hey, on this play, he didn't get to the quarterback because multitude of reasons. Maybe he was double teamed, triple teamed. Maybe the pass was just out before he got there because they're trying to avoid him, which we'll get to that in a sec. But there is something there to say like, hey, this guy was doing his job on this play, even though he didn't get his stats. So I get analytics like that. But again, you can't get carried away letting analytics become more important than the game itself. And I think that's what happens a lot of times when PFF starts these discussions and tries to create these narratives as happened after this game. And that's what was happening with analytics. And I think that's something that, at the end of the day, all these things don't matter. The Steelers won the game because of those guys over there who changed the game. And you can say, well, this, that, and the third about what Myles Garrett did or didn't do. He wasn't the game changer. They were. that's again what we're getting back to about the grade part. And again, sure, the Steelers game plan factors into this, right? Kenny Pickett was getting rid of the ball quickly on a lot of passes. They were trying to do their best to avoid Myles Garrett as they normally do. And Deshaun Watson was holding on to the ball a bit more in this game. And that does play a factor in this. So again, quantifying plays that might not show up on a hard stat sheet is cool, and that's important. But again, where PFF's flaws I think exist is that not every play has to be a win or a loss. It's not a binary thing, and that's something that I talked about with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. We were talking about this during lunch at the Steelers facility this week when we were kind of going over stuff, and it's just like having every play have to be a win or a loss is a mistake. There should be also neutral plays or just plays where you acknowledge, hey, this guy was completely schemed out of the play. You can't say anything here, and it's not a win or a loss for either side. And so I think that's what was happening with Myles Garrett a lot of his pass rushes. He looked good in how he was starting them, but he was never getting a chance to finish them because the Steelers weren't letting him. And that shouldn't count against him, but it also shouldn't count for him more than plays that are actually made by the Steelers players who made the actual plays. So again, that's where it comes down to. And I think the majority of people agree who cover the sport, hence why Alex Highsmith is AFC Defensive Player of the Week, as he should be. But again, this goes back to why I don't trust PFF grades to be the gospel. And again, PFF does a lot of things that I take account for and that I appreciate and look at and study and add that to my film analysis and then add that to my overall analysis. But this is where I think that there's a bit of a disconnect, is that, sometimes these analytics are treated to be the gospel and these grades are taken too seriously. And that leads to, some, animus between sides here. And especially a lot of people in Pittsburgh who kind of have grown to expect PFF to do these types of things where Myles Garrett gets greater than TJ Watt. This all kind of stems back from the 2021 season where TJ Watt he tied the all-time sack record of 22.5 sacks, won Defensive Player of the Year, was clearly the most dominant player on defense in the NFL, and yet Myles Garrett was given the highest defensive grade over TJ Watt by Pro Football Focus. And a lot of people were like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Why would one guy had significantly more sacks on less pass rush reps? This guy clearly was the more dominant player, but so that was a thing, and it's happened on multiple other occasions, throughout TJ Watt and Myles Garrett's career, because we're in year 7 for both of them. They came in the year at the same year, even the same round of the NFL draft, and that was huge. And so it's kind of been a back and forth over that time. And it got to the point where some Steelers fans were even joke about it. A friend of mine who's an attorney and a fan of the game, they saw the game and, they saw the stats get posted afterwards. And they kind of made this joke that PFF will grade Myles Garrett higher than both TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. Remember, he gets doubled every play, slash sarcasm, indicating he was making a joke there. And then he came back afterwards when PFF's grades were dropped, and he was like, okay, I was just being sarcastic, but how does PFF do this? He's like, I was writing basically an Onion article of a tweet, and then PFF made it reality. And it's just it's come to be expected here in Pittsburgh because PFF consistently does this when in times that it involves the Steelers. And that's a whole nother thing. And PFF I don't think has an agenda to make the Steelers look bad all the time, but I think that their analytics sometimes go against things that show the Steelers and why that they're good in certain situations, or times why they're bad. And so again, I look at this. PFF is a great tool with the information that it provides, and it can be very insightful, but we can't let those analytics come in and be more important than the game itself, especially when it comes to us as journalists and people who cover the game when we're looking at these things. I also think there is an unnecessary disconnect between what is journalism and what is analysts or analysis. And I say this because I used to be an analyst, strictly an analyst. That's how I got my start, right? And journalists, for those who might be wondering what's the difference here, journalists, when I'm saying journalists, I mean people who are traditional writers who cover NFL teams and other teams as well. They provide the color, the background, they tell the stories of the team they cover, and they include some analysis as well. But their main thing is they're writing the stories. It's kind of how I cover the University of Pittsburgh's football and basketball teams as well as the other sports. I do include analysis in my work, but I'm writing the stories there. Whereas analysts, they're specifically examining why teams won or lost and breaking down elements of the game. And that was how I got my start. Over the years, I think journalists have increased more of the analytics being used in their work, like work from databases like PFF, ESPN, Football Outsider, Sharp Analytics, as well as even film study. I truly believe there's a great potential for future media to blend these even better so that we can have better educational, entertaining ways to enjoy the coverage of these games that we enjoy so much in the NFL. And heck, again, this is how I got started. I used to blog about the Steelers, and what got me noticed to start getting more opportunities was my film studying. And I didn't have the database of information I was able to pull from all the time and say, oh, this is what's the best thing here. My dad was a coach. I learned football as a kid. I learned a lot of basics. I read a lot of books about football and technique and different formations and different things. And over the years, I had like a knack for it, and I would like to explain it to people. So I started doing it just for fun as an extra side gig, and then it became more and more, and now it's my full-time gig. And so that's how I got my start. And I encourage other people, if that's what you want to do it. Break down the game, study the game, talk about it on shows, create content about that, even if it's just for fun. It adds to the element here. You never know how far that can go. And I encourage you that, like, if you work hard at it, you'll get noticed, because the internet provides so many more opportunities to get your work out there than it ever has before, whether it's podcasts, Twitter accounts, Instagram accounts, subtexts, so many services out there that you can get your information out to subscribers, or just people that you want on the internet to say, hey, this person knows what they're talking about when it comes to football. So if that's something you want to do, go do it. But again, in my efforts to do so, I still want to maintain the journalistic integrity that focuses on the players, on the coaches, and what actually happened, and make sure that they are still the story, not me, not the metrics that I provide and bring in. And it's, again, provide the metrics, but where I think analytics go too far, and some analysts go too far, is when their metrics become the story. And it's not that the TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith won the game. They're not the best players in this game. It was this guy over here because of this stat that I'm providing right here. So look at this stat and let this take over the understanding of who was the best player on the field in the game. And that's where I think analytics sometimes can go too far. And that's where I think that as journalists, it's kind of our job to kind of balance the things. And again, I think journalism and analytics can very much be a better blend moving forward. I think that there's, kind of a back and forth, because journalists traditionally, way back when, didn't necessarily have to have analytics, but because it's become a bigger part of the media and become a bigger part of understanding the game, people are starting to incorporate it more. But I really think there's a future where these two things can be married, be better, and be something that I think is better blended for better coverage about these games, so that you, the fans, can get the taste of both the color and the stories, as well as the analytics. That's something that I strive to do in my work, and I hope that people enjoy that about my work, because that's one of the biggest things I try to bring. Is I bring the analytics, I bring the journalism, I put them together, and I hope it makes for an entertaining product, whether it's written, listened to, watched, whatever. That is where the goal should be. And again, in doing all of that, it needs to be about the players. It needs to be about the coaches. It needs to be about the execution. It needs to be about the film. It needs to be about the actual game itself. And if we do that, I think we'll all be happier for it and be better for it when we're talking about football. So all I have to say, just wanted to bring that discussion more to light and get out more of my actual thoughts in this conversation. So thanks to listening to me here. I'm Chris Carter of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the Locked On Steelers podcast. Check me out on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com, and find my shows on like the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, as well as the Locked On Steelers podcast. Both can be found on all your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Thanks again for checking out my bonus episode. I'll be back with you here on the Locked On Steelers podcast Sunday night, late Sunday night, after the Steelers Raiders game. We hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll see you then.